In the Horn of Africa lies a nation whose name has become synonymous with conflict. Somalia, an ancient land of traders, poets, and warriors, has spent more than 3 decades locked in cycles of violence. To the outside world, it is a country often portrayed as a failed state, a battlefield of militias, and a land without peace. But beneath the headlines lies a deeper story, one of geography, history, colonial legacy, and power. This is not simply a war of guns. It is a war over identity, survival, and the soul of a nation that refuses to die. Somalia's story begins long before modern borders were drawn. Its people, bound by a shared language, culture, and faith, once lived under loose clan-based systems that allowed autonomy and balance. The Somali Peninsula was a hub of trade for centuries, linking the African interior with the Middle East and Asia through bustling ports like Zayla, Berbera, and Mogadishu. Merchants sold frankincense, myrrh, and livestock. Scholars spread Islam, and poetry, the heartbeat of Somali culture, united people across vast deserts and coastlines. But the 19th century brought foreign powers, and with them, division. The British, the Italians, and the French carved up Somali lands into spheres of control. Britain took the north, Italy the south, and France the territory that would later become Djibouti. To the west, the Somali-inhabited Ogaden was claimed by Ethiopia, and to the east, Kenya absorbed Somali communities along its border. In the process, a single nation was split among 5 flags, and that fragmentation planted the first seeds of eternal conflict. When independence came in 1960, Somalis dreamed of unity. British Somaliland and Italian Somalia joined to form the Somali Republic. It was a moment of euphoria, the idea that one people, one language, one religion could form a strong, modern African nation. But the dream was built on fragile foundations. The borders imposed by colonial rulers left millions of Somalis outside their new homeland. The sense of injustice burned deeply, fueling the ideology of Greater Somalia, a vision to reunite all Somali territories under one flag. That ambition quickly led Somalia into confrontation. In 1964, and again in 1977, it clashed with Ethiopia over the Ogaden region. The latter war, known as the Ogaden War, would define Somalia's fate for decades to come. Under the military rule of General Mohammed Siad Barre, Somalia initially achieved dramatic victories, with Somali forces pushing deep into Ethiopian territory. But Cold War politics soon turned the tide. The Soviet Union, once Somalia's ally, switched sides to support Ethiopia, bringing with it Cuban troops and Eastern Bloc weapons. Somalia, abandoned, turned to the United States, but the damage was done. By 1978, Somali forces were defeated, morale shattered, and the state began to crack. What followed was a slow-motion collapse. Siad Barre's regime, once hailed as a modernizing force, grew increasingly authoritarian. His attempts to suppress dissent deepened clan divisions. The government's corruption, repression, and favoritism eroded national unity. Clan-based militias emerged across the country, each vowing to protect their people against a regime that had lost legitimacy. By 1991, Somalia exploded. Barre was overthrown, but instead of peace, chaos consumed the nation. The state disintegrated. There was no government, no army, no national police, only warlords carving territories out of ruins. Mogadishu, once a proud coastal city, turned into a war zone of checkpoints and militias. Rival factions fought for power, resources, and survival. Clan loyalty became the only law. Civilians paid the highest price. Famine, displacement, and death became daily realities. The outside world watched in horror as Somalia descended into what seemed like anarchy. But to understand why Somalia has struggled to escape this cycle, we must go deeper, beyond the battlefield, to the structural and psychological scars left by decades of manipulation and betrayal. Colonial borders had already divided the Somali identity. Cold War superpowers then turned Somalia into a pawn in their global chessboard. When the Cold War ended, Somalia was left with nothing. No allies, no institutions, and no vision for a united future. In 1992, as famine and violence worsened, the world finally intervened. The United States and the United Nations launched Operation Restore Hope, sending tens of thousands of troops to deliver aid and restore order. Initially, it was a humanitarian mission, but soon it became a political and military entanglement. When U.S. forces began targeting Somali warlords, most notably Mohammed Farah Aidid, clashes erupted. The infamous Black Hawk Down incident of 1993, in which American soldiers were killed in Mogadishu, shifted global attitudes overnight. The mission was withdrawn, leaving Somalia once again in chaos. The international community turned away, branding Somalia as a hopeless case. But from the ashes of warlordism, new forms of authority emerged. In some regions, Islamic courts began administering justice and restoring basic order. These Islamic courts were not perfect, but for many Somalis, they represented the first sense of stability in years. By 2006, they had gained control over much of southern Somalia, including Mogadishu. Yet their rise alarmed Western powers who feared the emergence of an Islamist state linked to al-Qaeda. Backed by the United States, Ethiopia invaded Somalia that same year to dismantle the Islamic Courts Union. The invasion reignited the flames of war. Out of the ruins of that conflict rose a more radical force, Al-Shabaab. What began as a small militia wing of the Islamic courts transformed into a powerful insurgent group with extremist ideology and deep local roots. It pledged allegiance to al-Qaeda and waged a brutal campaign against the transitional government and African Union forces. Once again, Somalia found itself at the crossroads of local grievances and global geopolitics. Today, more than 30 years after its collapse, Somalia remains caught in this tragic paradox, a people united by culture and faith, yet divided by politics and clan. Its cities are slowly rebuilding. Mogadishu's skyline has begun to rise again, yet beneath the surface, fragility persists. Corruption eats away at institutions. Militias still hold sway in many regions. Elections are often disputed, and the government's authority rarely extends beyond the capital. Foreign powers, each pursuing their own interests, continue to shape Somalia's destiny. The United States conducts drone strikes against militants. Turkey builds infrastructure and military bases. The Gulf states vie for influence through ports and investments. Even regional neighbors like Ethiopia and Kenya intervene directly, fearing that instability in Somalia could spill across borders. Somalia, once a proud and independent nation, remains entangled in a web of external manipulation. Yet, despite it all, there is resilience. Ordinary Somalis continue to rebuild their communities, open businesses, and educate their children. The Somali diaspora, spread across the globe, sends billions of dollars home each year, keeping families alive and the economy afloat. In cities like Hargeisa, in the self-declared Republic of Somaliland, peace and progress show what Somalia could be if governance and stability took root. But the path toward national unity remains uncertain. To truly understand why Somalia is always at war, one must look not only at guns and militias, but at the deeper forces that have shaped its modern identity: the legacy of colonial borders, the manipulation of clans by internal and external actors, the consequences of global geopolitics, and the absence of a shared national vision strong enough to transcend division. Somalia's tragedy lies not in its people, but in the structures that have repeatedly denied them peace. The Somalia of today exists in two dimensions: the physical landscape scarred by decades of war, and the invisible web of influence that binds it to global powers. To many observers, Somalia is a battleground where history never ended. But to those who look closer, it is also a laboratory, a place where competing ideologies, interests, and ambitions collide in the open, shaping the future of the Horn of Africa. The modern conflict in Somalia cannot be understood without examining the global economy that feeds it. Behind every warlord, militia, or political faction lies a complex network of financial incentives, weapons markets, resource trafficking, and the shadow economy. The collapse of state institutions left a vacuum that informal systems quickly filled. Ports, checkpoints, and even aid routes became sources of revenue. Smugglers, traders, and militia leaders built mini economies that thrived on instability. For many, peace would mean losing power and profit. War, therefore, became not only a tragedy, but a business model. Yet, amid this chaos, ordinary commerce never stopped. Somali traders maintained a resilient private sector that astonished economists. Despite having no central bank for years, money transfer companies, known as hawalas, kept the country connected to the world. Remittances from the diaspora flowed steadily, often exceeding foreign aid. In a strange irony, Somalia's informal economy proved more efficient than its formal one ever was. This resilience demonstrates an unbreakable truth. The Somali spirit has survived even where the state has failed. Still, resilience alone cannot replace governance. Over time, multiple attempts were made to rebuild a national government, each one fragile, each one contested. The Transitional National Government of 2000, the Transitional Federal Government of 2004, and later, the federal government established in 2012, all faced the same fundamental challenges: clan rivalries, corruption, and external interference. Every election cycle promised hope, yet every outcome reignited disputes about legitimacy and representation. Somalia's federal structure, designed to balance regional autonomy with national unity, has instead deepened political competition between Mogadishu and the states. One of the most symbolic battles is over oil. Offshore discoveries in the Indian Ocean have raised hopes of wealth, but also fears of new conflict. Disagreements between the federal government and regional authorities over who controls exploration rights have already stirred tensions. At the same time, neighboring Kenya and Ethiopia have stakes in these resources, blurring the line between economic rivalry and territorial dispute. For a country still trying to stand on its feet, the politics of oil has become another potential fracture line. Meanwhile, Al-Shabaab remains the single most enduring threat to Somalia's stability. The group's ability to adapt and regenerate has kept the country in a constant state of insecurity. It finances itself through taxation in the territories it controls, extortion, and smuggling. Even in government-held areas, its networks penetrate markets and local administrations. Despite years of military operations by the African Union Mission in Somalia, AMISOM, and now the African Union Transition Mission, ATMIS, the insurgency continues. Every gain on the battlefield seems temporary. Every attempt to build institutions is shadowed by the possibility of renewed violence. But Al-Shabaab's endurance cannot be understood solely through military terms. It is also a symptom of Somalia's deeper governance crisis. Many young men join not out of ideology, but out of necessity. Poverty, unemployment, and the absence of state services make militancy a path to survival. In rural areas where government presence is weak, Al-Shabaab provides basic order, resolves disputes, and collects taxes more predictably than officials in Mogadishu. This paradox, that a terrorist group can act as a form of governance, reveals how fragile the social contract remains. International powers have responded in predictable ways. The United States continues its counterterrorism campaign using drones and special operations forces to target militants. While these strikes remove key figures, they rarely eliminate the underlying causes. Civilian casualties, even when unintentional, fuel resentment and feed recruitment. Meanwhile, regional powers such as Ethiopia, Kenya, and Eritrea each pursue their own interests. Ethiopia seeks to prevent any revival of Somali nationalism that could threaten its Ogaden region. Kenya, scarred by Al-Shabaab attacks on its soil, maintains a military presence in southern Somalia to secure its border and protect trade routes. Eritrea, long isolated, sees Somalia as part of a strategic chessboard to counterbalance its rivals. Amid these competing agendas, Somalia's sovereignty becomes negotiable. Foreign governments train its soldiers, finance its budget, and even mediate its politics. Yet these same actors often pull the country in conflicting directions. Gulf states such as Qatar, the United Arab Emirates, and Saudi Arabia use aid and investments to expand their influence, aligning Somali politicians with their broader regional rivalries. Turkey, meanwhile, has emerged as a major player, building schools, hospitals, and infrastructure, while operating one of its largest overseas military bases in Mogadishu. For many Somalis, Turkey's engagement feels more respectful and long-term than that of Western powers. Yet even this alliance raises questions about dependency and sovereignty. Beyond the politics, the human cost remains staggering. Decades of war have produced one of the world's largest refugee populations. Millions of Somalis live in camps across Kenya, Ethiopia, and Yemen, entire generations born without ever seeing their homeland. Inside Somalia, droughts and floods, intensified by climate change, continue to devastate livelihoods. The country's nomadic and pastoral traditions, once its greatest strength, are now among its greatest vulnerabilities. When rains fail, livestock die. When floods come, crops vanish. The environment has become another battlefield, and climate refugees join the long procession of those displaced by bullets and hunger alike. This constant struggle for survival also reshapes Somalia's society. Women, often the most affected by conflict, have emerged as pillars of resilience, running markets, organizing communities, and sustaining families. The diaspora plays a vital role too. Somali doctors in London, engineers in Minnesota, and entrepreneurs in Dubai remain emotionally and financially tied to home. Their remittances exceed $1.3 billion annually, but their influence extends beyond money. Through education, business, and advocacy, the diaspora shapes international perceptions of Somalia, lobbying for peace and investment. They are proof that Somali identity transcends borders, even when the state cannot. Yet, the path forward is not without obstacles. As Somalia rebuilds, it faces the delicate task of reconciling tradition with modern governance. Clan structures, often blamed for division, are also the foundation of social organization. Any attempt to erase them has failed. The challenge, therefore, is not to abolish clans, but to integrate them into a broader framework of accountability and equity. Some regions have done this successfully. Somaliland, though not internationally recognized, has built a hybrid system that blends customary law with democratic institutions. Its relative stability offers lessons that legitimacy grows not from foreign recognition, but from local trust. Still, the broader Somali question remains unresolved. Should the nation pursue a highly centralized state, or embrace a looser federation that reflects its clan realities? Should it align with Western allies, or assert a new independent path in the multipolar world emerging today? These are not merely political questions. They are existential ones. Each choice carries consequences for identity, sovereignty, and survival. Beyond internal politics, the Horn of Africa itself is becoming one of the most strategic regions on Earth. The Red Sea and the Gulf of Aden serve as arteries for global trade connecting Europe, Asia, and Africa. Whoever controls these waters wields immense influence. Global powers, from the United States to China, from Russia to the Gulf states, all compete for access and presence. Somalia, sitting at this crossroads, finds itself surrounded by naval bases and foreign interests. Its ports, from Berbera to Kismayo, are no longer just commercial assets. They are strategic prizes, and in this silent struggle for dominance, Somalia risks becoming the ground on which others play their games. Yet history is not destiny. Across Africa, countries once written off as failed states have shown remarkable recoveries. Liberia rebuilt after years of civil war. Rwanda, once synonymous with genocide, transformed into a regional power. Even Ethiopia, despite its internal conflicts, has at times demonstrated the power of reconstruction. Somalia's path may be longer and harder, but it is not impossible. The key lies in political inclusion, institutional reform, and the gradual re-establishment of trust between government and people, between clans and state, and between Somalia and its neighbors. To achieve this, the international community must learn from its own mistakes. Military interventions have proven temporary. What Somalia needs is not just peacekeeping, but peace building. That means investing in governance, education, and infrastructure, not only in security. It means empowering Somalis to lead their own recovery rather than imposing external blueprints. It also requires acknowledging that Somalia's instability is not isolated. It affects the entire Horn of Africa, from Djibouti's ports to Kenya's borders, and even the shipping lanes of the Red Sea. Stability in Somalia, therefore, is a global interest, not a regional afterthought. As the world's attention shifts toward new crises, Somalia risks being forgotten again. But beneath the surface, a quiet transformation is taking place. New schools are opening, new businesses emerging, and a generation of young Somalis, connected by smartphones and global networks, are redefining what it means to be Somali in the 21st century. They speak of unity without uniformity, of faith without fanaticism, of pride without prejudice. They are the generation that could finally end the cycle of conflict, if given the chance. And so, the question, why is Somalia always at war, is not just about politics or religion. It is about a nation still healing from deep wounds inflicted by history and geography alike. It is about the legacy of borders drawn by outsiders and the struggle of a people to reclaim their narrative. It is about the tension between resilience and exhaustion, between hope and despair. Somalia is not doomed to war. It has simply never been allowed to rest. The story of Somalia is ultimately a story of endurance. Despite every collapse, the Somali nation remains. Its culture thrives through poetry, song, and memory. Its people, scattered across continents, still dream of peace in the land of their ancestors. And perhaps in that dream lies the beginning of a new reality, one where Somalia is no longer defined by its wars, but by its survival. Somalia has been wounded, yes. It has been broken, betrayed, and misrepresented. But it has never been defeated. Its strength lies not in its governments, but in its people, ordinary men and women who refuse to give up on tomorrow. For as long as they endure, the hope of peace endures with them. And maybe one day, when the world looks again at the Horn of Africa, it will no longer ask why Somalia is always at war, but rather how Somalia finally found its way to peace.